Céad Míle Fáilte, which is about the height of my Irish, but welcome to the 9th Annual Irish Arts Centre Poetry Festival. So on the one hand, I'll admit it feels a wee bit absurd to be holding a poetry festival at the present historical moment. The world is, you'll have noticed, in all kinds of chaos. Though on the other hand, what better thing to do than listen to some poetry? How does a poem work? It makes you enact in words someone else's experience. And it is no small thing to be reminded that other people's wants and fears are mappable on ours, particularly when we're told that others are fundamentally different, when public rhetoric attempts to separate the world into them and us. Populism claims to love the people, but of course it hates the individual, and poetry opposes that. It can only deal in individuals. And its trust in complication is at the far end of the verbal scale, from the demagogue's three-word phrases framed as coarse imperatives. There's a terrible violence done to language and human thought when the public discourse normalizes lies and racism and sexual violence. Poetry is a civic and civil response to the barbarities of the two-bit huckster's spiel, his slogans, his dog whistles. To read poetry, to come and hear poetry read, is to return to a space of complexity, of second thoughts, of third thoughts, of ambiguity and of empathy. I never understood Auden's line about poetry making nothing happen. It brought you all here tonight, and lots of us have shaped our lives around it. Poetry is always a form of political intervention, since it creates a reader who's interested in other people, in experience and truth. So, now that we're all agreed that it's a great place to be tonight, let's hear some poetry. We've got a terrific lineup, as Rachel said, and I'm very, very grateful to them all for taking time to come and be here tonight. Thanks a lot, guys.
Such an enormous pleasure to be here. 2 weekends ago, I was in Michigan celebrating the life of an American poet, Jim Harrison. One of Jim's more famous lines is that death takes away a lot of things, but not our stories. As it happened, then another friend of mine, and a friend of many people probably in the audience, and a poet of great renown, an Irish poet of great renown, passed away last week, Gerard Fanning. I think many of you know him. And Gerard, so when I thought about the confluence of Gerard and Jim, I thought death takes away a lot of things, but not our words. And I thought I'd read 2 poems by him this evening. He was, or he is rather, a great stylist, probably in the vein of someone like Elizabeth Bishop or Derek Mahon, with a sort of lovely mortal power to his lyrics. He talked about landscape, he talked about childhood, he talked about music, he talked about silence. He was quiet, he was hesitant, he was offhand and offbeat, and he was beautiful. And he didn't get enough praise, and I hope the praise will extend itself into the future. The first poem I'm going to read is called Tate Water. If you ask how a colour might come about, consider the enigma of water determined by the sky. And by water, I don't mean pool or rain barrel, but the wide expanse of sea or lake. As with all things, this will depend on where and when you look, because water absorbs light, and sea water absorbs the larger truths of late evening, greater than the timid blue of morning. So, if sunlight entering the sea is filtered until mainly blue and then washed back to the observer who could be you, dawdling on cliff or private promontory. Then, like you, a stain of light depends on impurity, just as your purplish skin for cold or bruise, like a Doppler note, brightens and passes and fades. And if pine lakes deliver a bluish tinge, remember in that water increasing salts or acids can make of the scattered light a trawl from pale yellow to darkish brown, and when peat is washed down, sunlight may lose itself and cannot scatter, and the lake becomes black. I can tell you, impasto, giving weight, how to make a profession of mute things, but remain at a loss to figure how the weight of water can be so sinister.
It's a privilege to be here. In keeping with the theme of Yeats, here's Adam's Curse. We sat together at one summer's end, that beautiful, mild woman, your close friend, and you and I, and talked of poetry. I said, a line will take us hours maybe, yet if it does not seem a moment's thought, our stitching and unstitching has been naught. Better go down upon your marrow bones and scrub a kitchen pavement or break stones like an old pauper in all kinds of weather. For to articulate sweet sounds together is to work harder than all these, and yet be thought an idler by the noisy set. Of bankers, schoolmasters, and clergymen the martyrs call the world. And thereupon that beautiful mild woman, for whose sake there's many a one shall find out all heartache on finding that her voice is sweet and low, replied, to be born woman is to know, though they do not talk of it at school, that we must labor to be beautiful. I said, there's nothing, it's certain there's no fine thing since Adam's fall, but needs much laboring. There have been lovers who thought love should be so much compounded of high courtesy that they would sigh and quote with learned looks precedents out of beautiful old books, yet that now seems an idle trade enough. We sat grown quiet at the name of love. We saw the last embers of daylight die, and in the trembling blue-green of the sky, a moon, worn as if it had been a shell, washed by time's waters as they rose and fell about the stars and broke in days and years. I had a thought for no one's but your ears, that you were beautiful, and that I strove to love you in the old high way of love, that it had all seemed happy, and yet we'd grown as weary-hearted as that hollow moon.
Hello, so lovely to be here. Thank you so much to Nick, to having invited me, and to Rachel. And the poem that I chose is also in The Zoo of the New, Nick's book, but I've got the Faber book here, sorry to be a traitor to the Zoo of the New tonight. It's a poem by Louis MacNeice, and I chose, it's very short, 3 little verses, but I think inside these 3 little verses are some of the vastest questions about being alive, being a human. I think it asks just huge existential questions, and it's just about one particular moment when it snows and there are roses in the inside and tangerines being peeled, and it's such a tiny, tiny moment, but it's the kind of poem I feel like you could read every day for the rest of your life and keep, it's like a puzzle. It's about the mystery of things. And it's called Snow. I think it's a really famous Irish poem. I'm just trying to find out from Nick if I'm going to butcher a big classic, but anyway, here goes, Snow. The room was suddenly rich, and the great bay window was spawning snow and pink roses against it, soundlessly collateral and incompatible. World is suddener than we fancy it. World is crazier and more of it than we think, incorrigibly plural. I peel and portion a tangerine and spit the pips and feel the drunkenness of things being various. And the fire flames with a bubbling sound, for world is more spiteful and gay than one supposes. On the tongue, on the eyes, on the ears, in the palms of one's hands, there is more than glass between the snow and the huge roses.
I was lucky enough to be here with Katrina back in 2009, so it's nice to be back with her again this year and with all of the other wonderful poets. I picked this not knowing that someone else would pick Snow. Yes, it's a really famous Irish poem, and I've picked a poem by Ciaran Carson, which is a deliberate response to Snow. And I think I picked it because I've left Belfast and I miss him, and so much of him is in this poem, as well as so much of MacNeice's masterpiece. I need my glasses now. Snow. A white dot flicked back and forth across the bay window. Not a table tennis ball, but ping pong, since this is happening in another era. The extended leaves of the dining table, scratched mahogany veneer, suggesting many such encounters or time passing. The celluloid diminuendo as it bounces off into a corner and ticks to an incorrigible stop. I pick it up days later, trying to get that pallor right. It's neither ivory nor milk. Chalk is better, and there's a hint of pearl translucent lurking just behind opaque. I broke open the husk so many times and always found it empty. The pith was a wordless bubble. Though there's nothing in the thing itself, bits of it come back unbidden, playing in the archaic dusk until the white blip became unusable. Just as the other day, I felt the tacky pimples of a ping-pong bat when the bank clerk counted out my money with her rubber thimble and knew the black was bleeding into red. Her face was snow and roses just behind the bulletproof glass. I couldn't touch her if I tried. I crumpled up the chit. No use in keeping what you haven't got, and took a stroll to Ross's auction. There was this 30s stuffed leather sofa I wanted to make a bid for. Gestures, prices, soundlessly collateral in the murmuring room. I won't say what I paid for it. Anything's too much when you have nothing. But in the dark recesses underneath the cushions, I found myself kneeling as decades of the rosary dragged by, the slack of years ago hauled up bead by bead, and with them all the haberdashery of loss, cuff buttons, broken ballpoint pens and fluff, old pennies, pins and needles, and yes, a ping-pong ball. I cupped it in my hands like a crystal, seeing not the future, but a shadowed parlour just before the blinds are drawn. Someone has put up 2 trestles, handshakes all round, nods and whispers. Roses are brought in, and suddenly white confetti seethes against the window.